You're tuned in to the Nonprofit Chatter, brought to you by Nonprofit Pro with our friends at Pursuant. Nhu Te and Taylor Shanklin are getting real and sitting down with nonprofit leaders to chatter about issues affecting nonprofits today. Be sure to subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss these conversations with your nonprofit peers. And check us out on the web at nonprofitpro.com/podcast/nonprofit-chatter.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Nonprofit Chatter podcast, hosted by me, Nhu Te, Editor-in-Chief of Nonprofit Pro.
And me, Taylor Shanklin, VP of Marketing at Pursuant.
The Nonprofit Chatter will give you an insider's look on the most pressing challenges facing nonprofit leaders and fundraisers today, and how to overcome them. In each episode, we'll engage in invigorating conversation with industry leaders and find out what tools and tactics nonprofits need in their repertoire to help their vision become a reality.
So in episode number 2 here today of the Nonprofit Chatter, we are going to dive into the challenges of silos within organizations and talk about how to overcome them. We are joined today by Chas Offut, who's the Senior Director of Development Services overseeing digital at PBS National, and David Sacchetti, Director of Client Solutions at Pursuant. Hey, Chas, David, thanks so much for joining us today. It's really a pleasure to have both of you here. We're really excited to talk about silos because both of you have been in the boots-on-the-ground position within nonprofit organizations, but you've also both been on the consulting side. So I think it will be really interesting to have your line of sight, having seen it from both angles. How are you both doing today?
Great, Taylor. This is Chas. Great. Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to be here as well. This is David, and I'm really excited about today's conversation.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So let's just get right into it. In order for nonprofit organizations to thrive and to make that vision a reality, people need to work together. But often we see it every day, organizations really fall into the pitfalls of silos. Why is it that you think that nonprofit organizations are so prone to falling into that pitfall? Chas, if you want to get started.
Sure. I think everybody would love to work together, and it's such an easy concept, isn't it? I think people, people inherently collaborative, and we are social species. However, I think there are certainly physical barriers, such as an organization's management structure that can impact culture, and I think that's a big piece of it. The management structure that is hierarchical sets a tone for all departments. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think the benefit is certainly one of speed, efficiency, and most definitely clarity of roles.
Yeah, I agree with you, Chas. And, in some ways, I feel like silos are kind of natural, right? Because people get wrapped up in their own work and they get wrapped up in thinking, about their own needs and their own, responsibilities within an organization. And I think for nonprofits sometimes, where there could be, less resources than maybe for-profit companies. There's a lot on people's plates, right? And there's a lot that they are responsible for. And so they're oftentimes very focused with heads down, just trying to get through the work and get their jobs done. And so sometimes that kind of siloed thinking can creep in inadvertently.
Yeah,
David,
totally.
I think that's a great point. And just to add to that, I think, when you work for a mission-based organization, a cause, you're invested kind of heart and soul into the mission, most likely. And there is a real kind of natural sense or desire to succeed. And sometimes the clearest path to success is head down and move forward.
Right.
And sometimes the challenge is certainly when you need to pick your head up and work with those around you, because that delays the process. But as we all know, that can delay the process. and it requires multiple perspectives and different buy-ins. But that takes time, and that's work, and there is no silver bullet for how you accomplish that.
Yeah. I would also say too that it doesn't. I think sometimes people think that silos occur in really large or complex organizations, like some federated nonprofits or the top 10. But it's not true. I think it can happen, even in much smaller nonprofits as well. So I think we automatically go to large, diverse, and complex organizations, but I think it's true across the board in our industry.
I love that you said that, and I completely agree. And let's dig into a couple of things here. So, one thing, David, you just said this, that people think it's often just the large organizations, but it's not. And I've seen that to be true too within large companies and startups, even startups with like a team of 5 I've seen be siloed, right? So I think a lot of it's about, and as you said this, Chas, it's about relationship building. It takes time, and so I think people do tend to get into this heads down mode. And, hey, I just got to get these 5 things done, and it's urgent, and I got to get heads down, and I don't have time to take my head up and focus on bringing everyone into this, right? So sometimes there's like a natural shift in this. You mentioned some of the benefits at times to silos. Let's dig into that a little bit. Like, what have you seen work well in a way because of the silos?
So I think I would add.
Dump everyone.
Well, as I kind of mentioned, I just said I think it's there's certainly speed is your friend. I mean, sometimes there's a very clear directive on what needs to be done, and to add to that, where it has to be sort of done in a quickly manner in which it is best to appoint or have one individual sort of go forth and accomplish.
Yeah.
And so timeliness is a big thing, I would say, and kind of expediency of the issue, of the work.
I think building on that, Chas, I agree with you, but I also think that it's kind of allows staff to specialize in their unique talents, right? So it gives them like some accountability and can provide some clarity around tasks that need to be accomplished. And so as an upside, and Taylor, you mentioned this maybe within some smaller organizations or, a startup like you mentioned, where everybody is doing everything just to keep things going and keep things afloat, so to speak. Silos can have a benefit there of providing that clarity around who's doing what and playing to people's strengths.
Mm-hmm. So, I think where the challenge comes in oftentimes with silos is people, when they hold things really close to them, and there's like politics at play, right? And then I also think, one of the pitfalls that I think happens with silos is that then when you don't have the left hand knowing what the right hand is doing, that can ultimately lead to poor donor and supporter experiences if they're getting different kinds of communications from different groups. What have either of you seen to work well to overcome that kind of a challenge and get people working together in that way?
Well, happy hour is always a good start.
It is. You're so right. You're right. Building those relationships,
it really is. I mean, kind of breaking it down a little bit, and I think if we sort of base silos on the assumption that it limits personal and professional growth, it's a treadmill can speed up or slow down, but you're still in the treadmill, and so the idea of really breaking down those silos is it is relational, and it is stepping out and taking a risk. In doing so, really kind of working across the aisle. And I say kind of facetiously happy hour, but I do put some truth in that. As much as lunches or bagel Fridays, certain kind of very tactical things that can really help, put a face on above and beyond the work you do, kind of humanize the effort.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I would build on that and say that I feel like it really starts with leadership, right? So silos really, I think, can only be addressed when the leaders within an organization are creating a culture of communication, which is what Chas was talking about, and trust. And that they have to model that behavior so that the rest of the staff can see, that this is the kind of culture that I'm living in, and it's okay for me to do this. It's okay for me to not feel protective of my donors. If there's one thing that I hate is when people say my donors. No, these are the organization's donors. They're not your donors. Right. So that everyone has a stake and kind of shared goals, I think, is super important, right? So it's having the staff engage with the leadership in kind of annual sort of strategic planning across the organization, not just coming up with a budget for your department, right, or the area that you work in. Helps kind of spread that accountability or shared goals, I think.
Dave, I think that's a really good point. I just add to that is I think it really starts from management. It starts from leadership as a whole, and that is what kind of sets a tone for the culture. Because that is so important at any organization. I'm sure you, all of us have been in sort of, what we feel is very, a culture of growth and learning filled with learning opportunities. But then we've also may have been in a culture that was a little bit more stymied or felt a little bit more stymied. And you tend to see, the burnout a little bit higher in those cultures, or departures, staff departures. And so, if you think of that, and I kind of struggle with this, and I think it's a really constantly struggle in kind of thinking through how do we provide or create a culture of innovation. I think that's really at its key, because we all, as creatures, who are social, we do want to grow. We do, I think, naturally. I believe that we naturally want to grow. And silos are just it's a learned behavior, so it requires more work to, I think, break it down. And go back to even like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which, the silos are sort of at odds with the whole premise. The notion that good ideas are restricted to only a select few is kind of crazy, right? When you have leadership or senior leadership only talking to senior leadership about, the answers, it's missing out on a whole nother audience. In fact, it can burn out that audience that you're actually disregarding.
Yeah, totally agree. And I also think that people tend to immediately think that silos are like an organizational issue or it's like an internal issue, but it absolutely directly impacts the people and constituents that you engage with. And it impacts that experience that a donor might have of the organization. The biggest example, or the one for me that always seems to come up is when, you have like a major gifts team who doesn't want the direct response team to communicate with any donor over $5,000 or $1,000. Even if the major gifts team doesn't have the staff to personally cultivate those important donors, it's like, why wouldn't you at least want them to get baseline communications to keep the relationship moving forward? And that's siloed thinking that has such a huge impact on the experience of a donor.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I love that you said that.
I do too. I think that's really, it gets into kind of metrics and goals and organizational structure. But as far as if you're looking at the major donor baseline, you are disregarding or potentially putting aside all the other sort of channels, fundraising channels that really impact the relationship. And so goals play a part of this. As far as are you, and from a development standpoint, do you have a single goal for your membership team, a single goal for for us sponsorship, a single goal for fundraising? And that may be the case, but until they're actually aligned and kind of roll up and have a single goal and a investment into the larger experience, you're gonna see this siloed effect and this sort of piecemeal.
Yeah. In my experience, just working at a nonprofit as well as being on the agency consultative side, is you oftentimes as well see the mission or programs people very siloed versus the marketing and sort of fundraising staff. And that's an area that I think a lot of organizations, their natural silos kind of develop, and which is sort of counterintuitive, right, to what we should be doing as an organization, where programs and fundraising and marketing are working in hand, so that we're putting the right messages out there, that we're, talking about what is, how the mission is advancing and in what ways. And so, having marketing and fundraising staff interact more with programmatic operations, I think is really key to busting silos down.
Yeah, and David, I think that's just to add to that, because where the silos may be, and I'm going to go out the limb here, but may be broken down the greatest is within development, because it's the donor that expects that. And my boss, Betsy Gerdeman at PBS, often says programming is not development, marketing is not development, digital is not development or fundraising, but development includes programming, marketing, and digital. So there's a heavy dependence upon what we do from the fundraising side that incorporates all of the different areas of engagement with our audience.
And that's really taking more of you're taking the supporter and you're focusing on them, and then you're figuring out how do all of these pieces and how do all of these ways that we touch those supporters fit into that, being focused on them through that sort of development function.
Yeah. And like one example of the way that in my experience that was very effective at breaking down the silos between programs and marketing and fundraising was using program experts within the organization sort of as subject matter experts, and give them some media training, right, for those that are willing and that would fit the mold to do that, and incorporate them into marketing and fundraising communications, so that they understand how we're going to market or how we're trying to reach constituents, and so that marketing and fundraising has a better understanding of what the programmatic challenges are.
That's a great
Great I mean, again, kind of getting down to sort of how do you break down those silos a bit, of course, but then also how you elevate conversation to ensure that we're all starting from the same place.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So there's this book that I read recently, and it's called What Great Brands Do, and the author talks about how it's like your brand really starts with your culture, and so that internal culture and that sort of like, hey, we're all one team mentality, then, trickles from the inside out, right, into the brand. And I think that's a lot of what, we've talked about here today with the silos, is building that culture, taking the time to go out to happy hour, building those relationships. That'll all trickle out from internally. All right,
Yeah,
so this has been awesome. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think that what we've all been talking about is really boils down to communication, right? So it's, leadership, having strong communication, and emulating a behavior for culture, and then communication between staff, in different departments or chapters, et cetera, and just fostering that culture and increasing the communication, I think, is really the key to breaking silos down.
Yeah. So to wrap that up, if you had one tip you could each leave for a leader of an organization trying to do that, what would you recommend them do? And Chas, I think maybe you were going to say something.
Well, one tip would be tough. But I'll try.
This is only a 20-minute podcast now.
I know. Clearly we have a lot to say here.
Bonus round. We'll do a bonus round.
I think I've mentioned a bit on the sort of a little bit more on a superficial level as far as the happy hours and, being somewhat facetious, but actually very true too. The reduce those barriers, not relying on email. All the things that we all, know in heart, but hard in practice sometimes. But things that I think I would leave with and kind of thinking to your question, Taylor, a bit is, is thinking about, one, if we on the premise that big organizational change is difficult. Hierarchical org chart is very common in nonprofits and a lot of organizations, right? A matrices is a bit of a shift, and shifting to more of a horizontal kind of framework definitely requires a lot of investment in resources, time, and change and culture. But I would say some of the one of the best ways, and in fact, I think we're starting to try this on here at PBS, is actually thinking what are some of the small steps, and some of the small steps are really big moves, and that may be something that a sprint, which is I'm sure you all are familiar with, and sprint groups are more akin to the agile methodology, and kind of from a product standpoint. But we have a couple sprints here going on that's really interesting, and that's getting representation from multiple teams across the organization to focus on one question, one challenge, one problem, and really help put forth a set of recommendations. And the sprint is really a period of time, a short period of time that allows for this, cross-departmental, cross-functional group to come together and really help to address a variety of an issue, a specific issue. We've got 3 groups going on here at PBS. One is a content sprint group, another is culture, and the third is fundraising from more of a omni-channel. So that is less of a big move or less of a investment as a kind of changing your org chart, but certain, group work can really be transformational for how we work across boundary lines.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that.
I love that too. I think that's so awesome. And I do agree that initiatives like that, especially in large organizations like Chas's, makes a huge difference. That was my experience as well, being at Easter Seals, which is also large, complex, chapter-based. But, I think what I would say is the one tip I could provide is, this is really ongoing, right? It's never done. It's never going to be perfect, right? And there's never going to be one kind of right solution. I would say that, it starts with leadership and leadership's dedication to addressing it within the organization. And if they can break the silos down across their management team and begin to create that culture of communication and trust and kind of foster that in the staff and lead by example, that's how you're going to really get real change and affect real change within your organization.
Awesome. Great stuff. Hey, Chas, we're going to have you back to talk about agile marketing with me, because that is where it's at.
It's a work in progress here. It's a work in progress.
Yeah, it is.
It always is.
Hence the name. All right.
Well, that about wraps it up for today's episode. Taylor and I want to thank you so much for listening in on today's podcast. But before I wrap it up, I kind of wanted to point out a few things during the podcast that really stood out to me. Obviously, with everything, there are benefits and there are challenges. And with silos, and while David, you said that silos can plan out people's strengths and clarify what people are doing within the organization, I also think that there's kind of a lack of communication. So we really don't know who's doing what, and it can be very inconsistent. And Chas, I really like what you said about starting with leadership and setting a tone for culture. And in order to break down the silos, you really have to work harder because it's a learned behavior. And finally, David, you mentioned that there's a need to create a culture of communication and trust in order to make effective change. And I think that's really great advice.
Yeah, Chas, David, thanks again. It's really been an absolute pleasure and a lot of fun. We'll follow up about round 2. Kidding. No, maybe I'm not. But thanks really so much for joining us today on the Nonprofit Chatter and for sharing your thoughts and insights on this topic.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Thank you all. Appreciate the time.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
And on behalf of Nonprofit Pro and Pursuant, we will see you on the next episode of the Nonprofit Chatter.